Daniel, Miss Jupiter, excuse me. Have to visit men's room.
Oh, for Christ's sake.
A film so disturbing its director said it damaged him permanently. A movie banned in over 40 countries for showing real human experiments. And a nuclear war drama so terrifying, the BBC refused to rebroadcast it for decades. These are 10 war movies so brutal they were banned in multiple countries. Number 10. Apocalypse, Now, 1979. Francis Ford Coppola's Vietnam War masterpiece wasn't just banned for its violence. It was banned for its unflinching portrayal of American soldiers committing atrocities, for its psychedelic nightmare vision of war, and for suggesting that the entire conflict was insane from the start. Countries like South Korea, Singapore, and parts of the Middle East either banned it outright or heavily censored it. Even in America, the film faced resistance before its release. The production itself was legendary chaos. Coppola shot for over 2 years in the Philippines. Martin Sheen had a heart attack on set. Marlon Brando showed up overweight and unprepared. Typhoons destroyed sets. The budget ballooned from $12 million to over $30 million. And through all that madness, Coppola created something that felt less like a movie and more like a descent into hell. What got the film banned wasn't just the violence, though there's plenty of it. The opening napalm strike was set to Wagner. The helicopter assaults on a village while Ride of the Valkyries blares. The Du Lung Bridge sequence where soldiers fight without knowing who's in command. It's all horrifying, but it's the psychological horror that really disturbs censors. The film suggests that war doesn't just kill bodies, it destroys minds, morals, and any sense of meaning. The character of Colonel Kurtz, played by Brando in those infamous improvised scenes, represents the complete breakdown of military order and human decency. He's gone native, set himself up as a god, and commands a private army that commits ritual murders. When Willard finally reaches him, instead of finding a monster, he finds a man who's simply seen too clearly what war actually is. That ambiguity, that refusal to condemn Kurtz completely, made censors nervous. The infamous ending, where Willard hacks Kurtz to death, intercut with a water buffalo being sacrificed, pushed the film over the edge for many countries. The violence is explicit, ritualistic, and deeply unsettling. And the fact that the film never clearly states whether Willard was right or wrong to call Kurtz, or whether anything was accomplished, left audiences without easy answers. South Korea banned it until the late 80s because the film's anti-war message conflicted with their own military government's policies. Singapore censored it heavily, removing most of the violence and drug use. Even today, some countries only allow edited versions. Apocalypse Now remains one of the most controversial war films ever made, not because it's gratuitous, but because it refuses to lie about what war does to people. Number 9. Full Metal Jacket, 1987. Stanley Kubrick made a Vietnam War film so brutal in its first half that audiences almost forgot there was a second half. Full Metal Jacket was banned or heavily censored in multiple countries, not just for violence, but for its savage deconstruction of military training and its suggestion that the system designed to create soldiers actually creates monsters. The film is split into 2 distinct parts. The first takes place at Parris Island Marine Corps boot camp, where drill instructor Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, played by R. Lee Ermey, psychologically tortures recruits. Ermey was a real drill instructor, and Kubrick let him improvise most of his dialogue. The result is some of the most vicious creative profanity ever put on film. But it's not just offensive. It's designed to show how the military breaks down individual identity and rebuilds men as killers. The character of Private Pyle, played by Vincent D'Onofrio, becomes the tragic center of the boot camp sequence. He's overweight, clumsy, and can't keep up. Hartman singles him out for special abuse, and the other recruits join in. D'Onofrio gains 70 pounds for the role, and his transformation from a soft, confused kid into a hollow-eyed killer is genuinely disturbing. The sequence ends with Pyle shooting Hartman and then himself in the bathroom, and it's one of the most shocking moments in any war film. The second half follows Joker, played by Matthew Modine, as a Marine Corps journalist covering the Tet Offensive. The shift in tone is jarring. The boot camp section is tightly controlled, almost theatrical. Vietnam is chaotic. Buildings burn, bodies pile up, A female sniper pins down an entire platoon, and when they finally cull her, she's just a teenager. The film offers no heroes, no redemption, just exhausted men trying to survive. What got Full Metal Jacket banned in several countries was its nihilism. There's no sense that the war means anything, or that anyone's death serves a purpose. The famous scene where a camera crew interviews soldiers and they all give contradictory, cynical answers about why they're fighting made censors nervous. This wasn't a film that supported any government's narrative about war being necessary or noble. Singapore heavily censored it. Vietnam banned it outright. Even in the UK, the film faced rating issues because of the language and violence. The British Board of Film Classification initially wanted significant cuts. Kubrick refused, and eventually the film was released intact, but with an 18 certificate. The film remains controversial because Kubrick strips away every comforting myth about war. There's no band of brothers, no coming of age, no transformation into heroes. Just boys turned into coolers who die for nothing. That honesty is what made Full Metal Jacket unbearable for many governments to allow their citizens to see. Number 8. Casualties of War, 1989. Brian. De Palma directed this film about an actual war crime committed by American soldiers in Vietnam, and it's so unflinching in its depiction of sexual violence and murder that multiple countries refuse to show it. Based on a true incident reported by Daniel Lang in The New Yorker, Casualties of War tells the story of a squad that kidnaps a Vietnamese girl, rapes her repeatedly, and then culls her to cover it up. Michael J. Fox plays Private Erickson, the one soldier who refuses to participate and later testifies against his squad mates. Sean Penn plays Sergeant Meserve, the squad leader who orders the kidnapping. Penn's performance is terrifying. He doesn't play Meserve as a psychopath. He plays him as a man who's been in combat so long that he stopped seeing Vietnamese people as human. That makes it worse somehow. This isn't a monster. This is what war does to regular people. The film doesn't shy away from the horror. The girl, played by Thuy Thu Le, is shown being dragged through the jungle, assaulted repeatedly, and finally shot when she tries to escape. De Palma films it all with his characteristic intensity, using long takes and fluid camera movements that force you to witness everything. There's no cutting away, no sparing the audience. You see what these men did, and it's unbearable. What makes Casualties of War especially disturbing is that it's based on documented events. This actually happened. In November 1966, a squad from the 1st Cavalry Division kidnapped Phan Thi Mao, a 20-year-old woman, held her captive for several days, and murdered her. One soldier, Robert Storby, refused to participate and reported the crime. 4 men were eventually convicted, though their sentences were later reduced. The film was banned or heavily censored in several Asian countries. Japan and South Korea both restricted its release. Even in America, many theaters refused to show it, and it performed poorly at the box office. Critics praised it, but audiences stayed away. Nobody wanted to watch American soldiers commit atrocities, even though that's exactly what happened. De Palma later said he made the film because he was angry about how Vietnam War movies always focused on American trauma and ignored Vietnamese suffering. He wanted to make a film that forced Americans to confront what their soldiers actually did. The studio, Columbia Pictures, barely promoted it. They knew it would be controversial, and they were right. The scene where Erickson testifies against his squad mates is particularly powerful. He's threatened, isolated, told he's betraying his brothers, but he refuses to back down. Fox, known primarily for comedies at the time, gives one of his best dramatic performances. He shows a man trying to maintain his humanity in a situation designed to destroy it. Casualties of War remains one of the most morally clear war films ever made. It doesn't offer ambiguity or arguments. It simply shows a crime and condemns it. That clarity made it too difficult for many countries to allow and too painful for many audiences to watch. Number 7. Salon Kitty, 1976.
Il nonno di mia moglie era ebreo.
This Italian exploitation film directed by Tinto Brass is about a real Nazi brothel used to spy on high-ranking officials. and it's so explicit in its depiction of sexual violence and Nazi atrocities that it was banned in multiple countries and remains controversial today. Salon Kitty isn't just shocking for shock value. It's a genuine attempt to show how the Nazi regime weaponized sex and used human degradation as a tool of control. A Berlin brothel that the SS took over in 1939. They installed listening devices, trained prostitutes to gather intelligence, and used the information to blackmail and control Nazi officials. The real operation was extensive, involving dozens of women and lasting throughout the war. Brass took that true story and made it into a lurid, excessive film that mixes historical detail with exploitation elements. Helmut Berger plays Helmut Wallenberg, an SS officer tasked with running the operation. Ingrid Thulin plays Kitty Kellerman, the brothel's madam, who initially cooperates but eventually rebels. The film shows the recruitment and training of the women, their assignments with various Nazi officials, and the gradual realization that they're trapped in a system that will destroy them, whether they cooperate or not. What got Salon Kitty banned wasn't just the explicit sexual content, though there's plenty of that. It was the combination of sex and Nazi imagery. The film shows swastika-decorated rooms, officers in full uniform engaging in various acts, and the casual cruelty of a regime that saw people as disposable tools. Several countries, including the UK, Canada, and Australia, either banned it outright or demanded extensive cuts. The film's most controversial scenes involve the training process, where young women are essentially broken down and rebuilt as intelligence assets. There's also a subplot involving a young officer who falls in love with one of the prostitutes, which ends tragically. Brass doesn't romanticize any of it. The film makes clear that everyone involved, oppressors and victims alike, is being destroyed by the system. Critics were divided. Some praised it as a serious examination of Nazi corruption. Others condemned it as exploitative trash, hiding behind a veneer of historical importance. Roger Ebert, reviewing it years later, called it deeply unpleasant but acknowledged it had something genuine to say about how totalitarian systems corrupt everything they touch, even intimacy and desire. Salon Kitty remains banned or restricted in several countries. Germany was particularly sensitive about it, given the subject matter. The film suggests not just that individual Nazis were evil, but that the entire system was designed to destroy human dignity at every level. That message, delivered through explicit imagery, proved too much for many censors to accept. Number 6. Men Behind the Sun, 1988. This is where we enter truly dangerous territory. Men Behind the Sun is a Hong Kong film about Unit 731, the Japanese biological warfare division that conducted horrific human experiments during World War II in Manchuria. The film was banned in dozens of countries because it shows, in graphic detail, experiments that were actually performed on living human beings. This isn't stylized violence. This is a recreation of documented atrocities. Director Mo Tun-Fei claimed he made the film to expose Japanese war crimes that had been covered up for decades. And he's right that Unit 731's activities were largely unknown in the West at the time. The unit, led by General Shiro Ishii, conducted experiments on prisoners, mostly Chinese civilians and Allied POWs. They infected people with diseases, performed vivisections without anesthesia, tested frostbite by freezing limbs, and committed acts so monstrous that American occupation forces granted immunity to the perpetrators in exchange for their research data. The film recreates these experiments in excruciating detail. There's a scene showing a frostbite experiment where a prisoner's arms are frozen and then thawed, causing the flesh to rot. There's a pressure chamber scene where a prisoner is subjected to extreme atmospheric changes until their intestines rupture. There's a sequence showing a live autopsy. The filmmakers claimed they used prosthetics and special effects for most of it, but there are persistent rumors that some scenes used real cadavers, possibly including a scene involving a child's autopsy. What makes Men Behind the Sun so controversial isn't just the graphic content. It's the question of whether showing these atrocities in such detail serves any educational purpose, or whether it's just exploitation. Mu insisted he was making a historical document that people needed to see what actually happened. Critics argued that the film crosses the line into pornography of violence, that it becomes about the spectacle of suffering rather than the historical truth. The film was immediately banned in Japan, which has a long history of denying or minimizing Unit 731's activities. It was also banned in Australia, several European countries, and restricted in many others. Even in places where it wasn't officially banned, distributors refused to carry it. The few theatrical releases it got were heavily protested. The accuracy of the film is debated. Some historians confirm that, yes, these experiments did happen, and the film is not exaggerating. Others argue that, while the general facts are correct, the specific recreations are sensationalized. What's not debated is that Unit 731 was real, that thousands of people were murdered in medical experiments, and that the perpetrators largely escaped justice. Men Behind the Sun spawned several sequels, each more exploitative than the last. But the first film, despite its extreme content, has defenders who argue it's an important historical document. It forced conversations about Japanese war crimes that many people, especially in Asia, felt needed to happen. Whether the ends justify the means, whether showing such graphic violence actually educates or just traumatizes, remains an open question. Number 5. Canal, 1957. Andrzej Wajda's film about the Warsaw Uprising was banned by Soviet authorities and heavily censored in multiple Eastern Bloc countries because it portrayed Polish resistance fighters as heroes and suggested that Soviet forces deliberately allowed the Nazis to crush the uprising. Canal isn't banned for graphic violence, though there's plenty. It's banned for political reasons, for telling a version of history that communist governments wanted suppressed. The film takes place in September 1944 during the final days of the Warsaw Uprising. A group of Polish Home Army soldiers and civilians are trapped in the city as German forces close in. Their only escape route is through the sewers. The entire second half of the film takes place in these tunnels, and Wajda turns them into a descent into hell. People get lost in the darkness. Wounded soldiers beg to be left behind. The walls close in, and there's no way out. Wajda himself fought in the resistance, and Canal draws directly from his experiences. The film is dedicated to those who died in the sewers, and you can feel the personal nature of the story. This isn't a Hollywood adventure where heroes triumph. It's a memorial to people who fought and died for nothing, abandoned by the Allies who were supposed to help them. The film ends with most of the characters dead or captured. There's no heroic last stand, no redemption, just waste. Wajda later said he made Canal because someone needed to tell the truth about what happened, even if it meant his film would be banned. It was a risk that almost destroyed his career, but he believed the story needed to be told. Today, Canal is recognized as a masterpiece, one of the greatest war films ever made, and a testament to the people who died fighting for a freedom they never achieved. Number 4. Threads, 1984. This British television film about nuclear war is so relentlessly bleak, so thoroughly devastating in its portrayal of societal collapse, that the BBC refused to rebroadcast it for decades. Threads wasn't banned by governments in the traditional sense, but it was effectively suppressed through limited distribution, and many countries refused to air it at all. Those that did show it often buried it in late nighttime slots and issued warnings that remain some of the most severe ever attached to a television program. Director Mick Jackson and writer Barry Hines created something that goes far beyond typical nuclear war films. This isn't the day, after with its melodrama and relatively quick resolution. Threads follows Sheffield, England before, during, and after a nuclear attack, showing in documentary-like detail how everything that holds society together simply disintegrates. The title refers to the countless threads that connect our civilization, and the film shows every single one of them breaking. The film is structured in 3 parts. The first shows ordinary life in Sheffield as international tensions escalate. A young couple, Ruth and Jimmy, discover Ruth is pregnant. They plan their wedding, life continues, then the bombs fall. The attack sequence is brief, almost anticlimactic. There are no Hollywood special effects, just blinding light, collapsing buildings, and screaming. The real horror comes after. The second part shows the immediate aftermath. Hospitals overflow with burned and dying patients. The government's emergency plans prove completely inadequate. Food runs out. Water becomes contaminated. Radiation sickness spreads. Bodies pile up faster than they can be buried. Jackson films it all with clinical detachment, using statistics and on-screen text to explain exactly what's happening and why. It's the opposite of emotional manipulation. It's cold, factual, and infinitely more terrifying because of it. The third part jumps forward years, then decades. This is what sets Threads apart from every other nuclear war film. It doesn't end with the bombs. It shows the long-term consequences. Agriculture collapses because of nuclear winter. Technology regresses to medieval levels. Language itself begins to break down as education becomes impossible. Ruth's daughter grows up in a world that's barely human anymore, scratching out survival in the ruins. The film was shown in America on TBS in 1985, but never repeated. Several European countries refused to broadcast it at all. The Soviet Union banned it, calling it Western propaganda designed to terrify people about nuclear war. Which is ironic because the film doesn't take sides. It simply shows that nuclear war would destroy everyone equally. Jackson later said he wanted to make something so realistic, so thoroughly researched, that viewers couldn't dismiss it as science fiction. He consulted with scientists, medical experts, and government officials. Every detail, from radiation effects to agricultural collapse to linguistic breakdown, is based on actual projections of what would happen. That commitment to accuracy is what makes Threads so unbearable and why it remains the most realistic depiction of nuclear war ever filmed. Number 3. The Painted Bird, 2019. Václav Marhul's adaptation of Jerzy Kosinski's controversial novel is one of the most recent films to face widespread bans and walkouts. The Painted Bird follows a young Jewish boy wandering through Eastern Europe during World War II, witnessing and experiencing atrocities that push the boundaries of what can be shown on screen. The film runs nearly 3 hours and is shot in stark black and white, making it feel like a nightmare from which there's no escape. The boy, never named, is separated from his parents and passed between various villagers, each more cruel than the last. What he experiences is a catalog of human depravity, sexual violence, torture, murder, all shown with unflinching detail. Marhul doesn't use these scenes for shock value. He's trying to show how war doesn't just happen on battlefields. It poisons entire societies, turning ordinary people into monsters. The film's most notorious scene involves a man whose eyes are gouged out by a jealous husband. It's shown in graphic detail, and this single scene caused mass walkouts at the Venice Film Festival premiere. But there are other scenes equally disturbing. A woman is gang-rapied and murdered. The boy is thrown into a cesspit. Animals are brutally cold. A collaborator is buried alive. The violence is constant and overwhelming. What makes The Painted Bird especially controversial is the question of whether it's historically accurate or exploitative. Kosinski's novel was marketed as autobiographical, but later investigations revealed he fabricated much of it. He wasn't actually separated from his parents during the war. Many of the incidents described never happened to him personally. This raises uncomfortable questions about the film. If these events aren't based on truth, what's the justification for showing them so graphically? The cast includes Harvey Keitel, Stellan Skarsgård, and Barry Pepper in small roles, but the film rests on Peter Kotlar, the young actor playing the boy. He barely speaks throughout the film, communicating only through his eyes, which reflect every horror he witnesses. His performance is remarkable and deeply unsettling because we're watching a child process things no child should ever see. The Painted Bird forces viewers to confront the question of how much horror can be shown before a film stops being art and becomes something else. There's no easy answer. What's certain is that this film exists at the absolute limit of what most audiences can tolerate, and its graphic nature has ensured it will remain controversial and frequently banned for years to come. Number 2. Come and See, 1985. Alem Klimov's masterpiece about the Nazi occupation of Belarus is frequently cited as the most disturbing war film ever made. It was restricted or banned in multiple Western countries upon release and remains difficult to watch today, not because of gratuitous violence, but because of how effectively it captures the psychological destruction of innocence. This is a film that doesn't just show war, it makes you feel what war does to a human mind. The story follows Flyora, a teenage boy who joined Soviet partisans in 1943, thinking war will be an adventure. Within hours, his entire worldview is destroyed. He returns to his village to find everyone dead, massacred by German forces. He wanders through forests with a young girl, both of them in shock, barely able to process what they have witnessed. The camera stays close to Flyora's face throughout, and we watch him age years and days. Klimov, whose wife's family died in the Nazi occupation, spent 8 years developing the film. Soviet authorities were nervous about it because it didn't fit the standard heroic narrative of the Great Patriotic War. There are no brave last stands, no inspiring speeches, just terror, confusion, and senseless death. The film was eventually approved but given limited distribution. When it reached the West, several countries refused to show it. The sound design is intentionally overwhelming. Explosions are deafeningly loud. Flyora's hearing is damaged in an early scene, and the audio becomes muffled and distorted, putting the viewer inside his damaged perception. There's a constant ringing that mirrors tinnitus. Voices become hard to understand. The effect is disorienting and deeply unsettling. You feel Flyora's confusion and terror because Klimov has literally made you share his sensory experience. The film ends with one of cinema's most powerful sequences. Flyora finds a portrait of Hitler in the mud and begins shooting it. As he fires, we see archival footage running in reverse, showing Hitler's life backwards from the war to his childhood. Flyora stops shooting when he sees Hitler as a baby. He can't kill a child, even in fantasy. The implication is devastating. Even Hitler was once innocent. Evil isn't born, it's created. And war creates it in everyone it touches. Klimov never made another fiction film after Come and See. He said the experience of making it was too traumatic, that he'd said everything he needed to say about war and couldn't bear to revisit that territory. The young actor, Alexei Kravchenko, was hypnotized for some scenes because the material was too intense. Klimov wanted real fear in his eyes, and he got it. Number 1, Salo, or the 120 Days of Sodom, 1975. Pierre, Paolo Pasolini's final film, remains the most banned war movie in history, prohibited in dozens of countries for decades and still restricted in many places today. Salo takes the Marquis de Sade's novel and transplants it to the final days of Mussolini's Italian Social Republic, creating an allegory about fascism that's so sexually explicit and violent that many consider it unwatchable. This isn't a film about combat. It's about what fascism actually is, the complete domination and degradation of human beings by those in power. The plot is simple but horrifying. 4 fascist libertines, representing different aspects of power, political, judicial, religious, and economic, kidnap 18 teenagers, 9 boys and 9 girls, and subject them to months of psychological, sexual, and physical torture. The film is structured like Dante's Inferno, with circles of increasingly severe abuse. The victims are stripped of their identities, their humanity, and finally their lives, all for the entertainment of their captors. Pasolini wasn't making a shock film. He was making a political statement. Fascism, he argued, isn't just a governmental system. It's the ultimate expression of power over the powerless, the reduction of human beings to objects to be used and discarded. Every act of degradation in Salo represents something fascism does on a societal level. The forced feeding of excrement represents how fascism forces people to consume and internalize its ideology. The sexual torture represents how totalitarian systems violate every aspect of private life. The final murders represent the inevitable conclusion of fascist logic. The film was immediately controversial. Pasolini finished editing just weeks before he was martyred in mysterious circumstances that some believe were politically motivated. When Salo premiered, it was seized by Italian authorities. The director was dead and couldn't defend his work. The film was banned in Italy for years, and when it was finally shown, riots broke out in theaters. It remains banned or heavily restricted in dozens of countries. What makes Salo particularly difficult to watch isn't just the explicit content, though that's certainly part of it. It's the cold, distant way Pasolini films everything. There's no emotional manipulation, no music cues telling you how to feel. The camera observes atrocities with the same detached gaze it uses for conversations. This clinical approach makes everything more disturbing because it mirrors how the fascist characters see their victims, as objects in an experiment rather than human beings. Salo remained banned in multiple countries including Brunei, South Korea until recently, and was banned in Australia until 1993. Even in countries where it's legal, it's almost never shown in theaters. It exists in a category of its own, too extreme for most audiences, too politically confrontational for many governments, and too artistically significant to dismiss. Whether it's a masterpiece or an abomination depends on who you ask, but there's no question it's the most banned war film ever made. These 10 films pushed boundaries, challenged censors, and forced audiences to confront the reality of war without filters or comfort. Some were banned for political reasons, others for graphic content, but all of them refused to lie about what war actually does to human beings and societies. They remain essential, difficult, and in many places, still forbidden.